The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, afternoon, or wherever you may be. Welcome to the Virtualization Virtual Chapter this week. This month, we have David Klee with us. And it's an honor to always have David and his virtualization knowledge and cloud knowledge that he has. And we're also, just to let everybody know, if you're going to go to Past Summit this year, we do have a code that we can get you for $150 off. If you've never been, twist your employer's arm, break their arm, whatever you need to do to try to get there. 5,000 of your best friends will be there. It's like a big family reunion, but great learning. David's there and a bunch of other people. I'll be there. I'll be there to greet you for breakfast every morning. So if you make it. So, all right. Well, we're going to start out this morning. David, welcome. You got any introductory remarks before we start asking questions before we get in the presentation?
Yeah, no, I just want to say, everybody, thank you for attending. We're having a lot of fun with this stuff. The world is constantly changing. Cloud is here. Virtualization is still critically important. It's this fun mix where the hybrid world with clouds is coming if you're not already there. I see this really strong mix. So keep the questions coming, keep the topic suggestions coming with a lot of this. We're evolving our public stance, essentially. Virtualization tuning, cloud tuning, and all the stuff you need to be able to put all this stuff together.
Well, that's very true, David. And so, David, a few questions for you. Where do you see cloud adoption going?
I see people starting to move dev test. I do see a number of customers that are already all in on production. I see a lot of other companies that are just saying no way, and continuing to pump a lot of money into on-prem infrastructures. And in some cases, the on-prem environments are a lot cheaper. They're more predictable. They're faster in some areas. A lot of other companies, they just don't want to deal with the data center technology anymore. They're tired of the capital expenses when they can move it more to an OpEx model. There are other companies where, we just did one a couple weeks ago. Their core infrastructure is on-prem, but they're moving these edge web servers for their web application, and they're putting it in geo proximity to a lot of their regional customers. And this kind of model, it's fluid, it's flexible, and I see the world putting in cloud technologies where they make sense and keeping stuff on-prem where it makes sense. It's fun.
Yeah, I'll give you a kind of a story on us, David. We actually moved one of our databases up into Azure DB, and we started probably about 6-8 months ago, and it is had nothing in it, totally empty database. And to show you how active this thing is, it's already up to about 200 gigs within 6 months. So to talk about it, we're looking at actually going the opposite way. We're talking about, because of cost and because of stream cost and stuff, we're talking about bringing that database back from the cloud back on-prem. So that's kind of an interesting thing because of the growth of it and stuff. It's handled it very well. It's of course using the automatic tuning indexes, which has kind of been nice. It's a third-party application, so it's not one that we built. So David, what services do we see being adopted?
I see all kinds of stuff, honestly. VMs with SQL Server in it seems to be the platform of choice, largely because of code patterns. A lot of times we'll have cross-database queries. A lot of times we may want explicit control over file groups and object placement, all these sort of things where, certain database as a service models may or may not actually have a lot of these components. Azure managed SQL instances are in public preview now, and they look to be incredible. If you just need a database, then why deal with an operating system? Why deal with patching this thing? Improved or easier HA. So take those and leverage database as a service. But it's really, what sort of legacy application model are you stuck with? What can you modify? What can you tune? Me personally, I don't want to have to deal with operating systems anymore. I just want to deal with the stuff that matters to me, which is database availability and efficiency tuning. So in some cases, I still have to deal with the OS though.
Yeah. How about on-prem virtualization? What do you see going on there?
Oh, that's an interesting area right now. I see a slow evolution of on-prem hypervisors continuing to happen. So VMware, Hyper-V, a lot of the open source variants. I see the hypervisor layers becoming a little more fragmented. There's a lot of the open source competition out there that's doing a great job. A lot of the KVM variants on Linux, they're getting better and better. The tooling's getting better. The performance overhead is reducing. There's a lot of good stuff out there. It's good to see competition because it keeps everybody on their toes and keeps everybody moving forward.
All right. And what do you see in Linux? What's that? How do you feel that's going to affect us with virtualization and cloud and stuff? Have you had any
Well, Linux
experience
is
there yet?
Yeah, oh yeah, we've been doing a lot with SQL Server on Linux, and in our test labs, over half the VMs are Linux-based because SQL Server is not the only database engine out there, and it's not the only Windows is not the only platform to run business-critical applications. We've got one customer; they are 100% Java for their applications and SQL Server for their data layer. The second I told them that SQL Server on Linux hit public preview, they flipped out because they're tired of dealing with Windows. They love SQL Server and they're going to stick with it. But if they can get to an operating system that is a smaller operational footprint, it makes for better consolidation. It's easier to manage for them because they have the expertise in-house, where Windows is kind of a stretch. And just in mass, the overall resource consumption required just to maintain the operating system is a lot smaller. So they end up with some pretty significant net savings as a result.
Cool. So how do you see containers? I know it's kind of like the next wave of virtualization, or it seems like, I've been studying it and stuff. How do you see containers playing in this game?
Oh, containers are awesome. Essentially, containers are basically the next level of virtualization. It's encapsulate every single component of an application and all its dependencies so that you can deploy the application as one bundle, but you don't have to worry about the baggage of a virtual machine, which is multiple operating systems, one per VM. You don't have to drag that around anymore. So if you want to deploy SQL Server, you can drop SQL Server on a machine. If you want to lift it and move it to another machine, you can. You don't have to worry about reinstalling it. You don't have to worry about the OS underneath. Containers are still in their infancy. There's some challenges around, scale. Automation is still improving dramatically. Security is kind of a concern with people, but there's a lot of stuff that's evolving with this very rapidly. To me, containers make a whole lot of sense from an application perspective. From a dev test platform, it makes an incredible amount of sense from a database perspective. Prod, get some of these other kinks worked out, deal with increased portability and improved availability for the database engine that's supported in containers, and then I'll be on board.
All right. Got a couple questions from the crowd here. Are you seeing clients move to platform as a service such as Pivotal Cloud Foundry, either on-prem or in the cloud?
In some cases, yeah. If their application, so that one in particular, Pivotal, it's solid. If you are a Java-based shop, the Pivotal platform is really cool. It's really compelling. Do I see people dropping some of the existing application stacks and migrating over to it if they're on a different technology? Not really. It is compelling. It is rock solid. But the application as a service construct in general, I see people flocking to. Because if they don't have to deal with an operating system underneath, web application servers or just straight up app servers, then by all means, we've got a bunch of stuff brewing on Azure right now. Even all the way down to some of the NoSQL platforms. We're doing a lot with Cosmos DB at this point. And it's just fantastic to see these different platforms out there with an application framework that just drops in, and you don't have to worry about outward scalability, and it just works. It's just incredible.
All right, another question. Do you have any exposure to a new product called Windocs, which is a custom port of SQL Server on Docker?
I haven't played much with that one in particular, but just SQL Server in containers works really well. So my assumption is that they basically just put a better interface on the the existing technology that works really well. So I'd have no hesitation to go with it.
Well, and I'll kind of address that one for a little bit there, David. We did a presentation with the owner, Paul Stanton, I believe was his name, a few months ago. So go check out our YouTube channel, and you should find the Windoc presentation that he did. It was very good. Sounds like the product's actually not new, but been around for a while. So if you have any questions there, Ronald, just let me know, send me an email, and I'll point you to the presentation. It was probably, I'd say 4 or 5 months ago that we did that presentation. So,
Cool.
all right. Is there a cookbook or a lab exercise you recommend to build hands-on skills for virtualization and cloud?
Yeah, I mean, oh my goodness, there are so many possibilities here. Just to get started, if you look at the Microsoft Virtual Academy, they've got labs on there. There's VMware hands-on labs. So I think it's just hol.vmware.com. Both of those are free. They work really, really well. Me personally, when it comes to cloud skills, I'm always partial to Azure because, well, they own the code, and I've had really good experiences with it. If you've got MSDN in your organization, I think you get 100, 150 bucks a month of free credit. That's enough to spin up a VM when you want to play with it, tinker with it, dabble with it, experiment with it, break it, whatever you need to do, and turn it off when you're done. Save that money so you can experiment with it. And as a result, you can invest time, but you don't really have to invest a lot of money, and you can really get up to speed with this stuff. It doesn't take that long. We're in there hours a week experimenting, playing, just a lot of really good stuff in there. Again, if you want to do the cloud hands-on, there's no better way than really just diving in. Do you want to try experimenting with an availability group there? Deploy a couple of SQL Server VMs, turn it on. As soon as you're done, turn it off. Nice and straightforward.
Yeah, and if you don't have a MSDN, David, one of the things they changed, not sure exactly when they changed it, but I did a presentation on beginning Azure recently, and they changed the trial edition to a year now. So you have up to a year to kind of play with it instead of just 30 days, what they used to give you. So
that's awesome.
Much better to give people a chance. You still have a certain number of credits per month you can use. It's not like they're going to let you just go out there and blow it away. But again, if anybody's interested in that link, just send me an email and I'll be glad to pass it on to you to show you. But just go look up Azure trial edition and in Google or Bing and you'll find it there. So.
Yeah, well worth the time spent. I mean, this is, in my opinion, not to get too far off topic, but even if your organization is not interested in cloud at this time, the world is moving there. Even if it's just a hybrid model for most organizations at this point, even if it's just to back up DR out there. So it's worth it to you and your career to get familiar with this and get hands-on with it, because who knows, maybe somebody in your organization may have a change of heart tomorrow. You'll be ready. Or, if you change organizations and they're all in, you don't want to be behind. You actually want those skills so you can better land that job.
Yeah, that's for sure. Don't let your skills get behind. Always kind of at least have a knowledge of it. You may not be totally 100% proficient, but at least have a knowledge of it. So, how do you convince a CISO, security officer, who is concerned about moving sensitive data to the cloud?
How do I address them? very
How do you
carefully.
convince them? Yeah, how do you convince them to go? How do you convince them, that the data is secure?
Man, that's a good question. How do I convince them to go to the cloud with sensitive data? Well, I look at it this way. How do you convince them that their data is safe on-prem? You have things such as encrypted storage, encrypted SANs. There's database table level encryption from an application to separate them out. If it comes to moving to the cloud providers, there are a certain level of compliance that you can actually just seek out in a cloud provider as part of the base platform, and you get that level of adherence to those standards just out of the gate. To me, cloud is more secure than on-prem, largely because if you deploy stuff on-prem, it in some cases is wide open and you have to opt in to lock it down. If you're in the cloud, it is so locked down by default that you actually have to unlock it just to be able to get in to administer it yourself, let alone do anything with it. So if you're concerned with it, and that's the right thing to be concerned with, you have to follow the rules. You have to follow the check boxes, because if you don't, you end up with unsecured, blob containers or Amazon S3 buckets. You end up with database vulnerabilities that are going to get exploited. You end up with, just wide open things that can be brute forced. But if you follow those properly, which you should already be doing on-prem, then now secure the data just like you would on-prem. And if you do rules, it's as secure as you make it.
Well, what's interesting to me, David, is that, Azure's got, up in the cloud, like especially Azure Sequel DB's got threat detection. You just check a box and you basically now can pretty much have threat detection and stuff. And where, on-prem, I know that, there's no box to check to do that. So, I kind of agree with you that it's probably far more secure up in the cloud than it is on-prem.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way the world is going. Cloud has all these components baked into it. You can either disable them if you want to, or opt in to turn them on. On-prem, you want to add a threat detection mechanism. You got to go buy some specialized hardware and wire it in and make sure, just an inordinate amount of cost and time and energy to go plug in a test, or check the box. I'm all for that. I'd rather spend my time making this thing more efficient, making this thing consume resources better, than having to deal with all the setup of this cumbersome stuff off to the side. Use it because it matters.
Yeah, and the other thing to look at is like some of these things that you have to become client for, like in Europe, the GDPR, which is coming out and stuff, is Microsoft in Azure is going to be there far faster than we would probably on-prem and stuff. So.
Oh yeah, just flat out, if you've not heard of GDPR in your organization, please go hit the internet, go look up what this means. You have until, I think, most of the way through May to have a plan for compliance in your organization. And if a request comes in, you have 3 days. And this particular law has teeth. There is definitely a bite behind the bark. If this is not a priority in your organization, it should be. And I don't care if it's, I don't care if you're a DBA developer, whatever, you have to have this taken care of now. So stop what you're doing after this. Go ask your boss, are there any plans in place for GDPR compliance? Because we're all having to deal with this.
Yeah, and the main thing to not really, to freak you out, yes, you need to go understand what it is. And two, I know that we are a 100% US-based company, so where I work. So I'm like going, whew, I don't have any European country people in my database. So
doesn't matter. If you have European citizens that live in America in your database, you are subject to this.
Well, don't tell me that, David. You just, increase my workload, I don't
care.
That.
I'd rather increase your workload now than have a regulatory body come down on you after the fact with a really hefty fine, because that is essentially a resume generating event.
Yeah. So, if you don't know what it is, guys, definitely go look it up and stuff. So, Anyway, with companies moving to the cloud, do you see a change in the DBA skills?
I do. I do. And that was actually the original intention of today's session. What I think we may do is just keep the open Q&A format and table this for a future month. The discussion around the infrastructure skills, or just the skills in general for a DBA, to me, are changing. I will flat out tell you, I don't believe that it will remove jobs from, in my opinion, seasoned, average or better DBAs. What it is going to do is reduce the amount of rote overhead you have in the mundane, simple tasks, checking logs, checking on availability solutions, checking on a lot of the normal things that we have to go fight fires for. Patching, stuff like that. When you're in the cloud, there are some of these things that are at least streamlined, if not automated. And what you can finally start to do is, instead of fighting fires all the time with the platform underneath, you can start focusing on the code. And you can look at the data and look at the way the thing is being maintained. In my opinion, this frees up some of the firefighting time to actually start to be proactive. And in my opinion, this is where the efficiency skills, not necessarily the performance tuning skills, but the efficiency skills of being a DBA will really start to shine. The reason I say this is because if you as a DBA can go in and not have to worry about firefighting for 4 hours a week, if you can start to do things like query tuning and table optimization and managing indexes better, what's going to happen there is that the net resource consumption of that database is going to decrease. The performance gains come with the tuning, but the resource consumption is a big one, because when you're in the cloud, guess what? Most of these platforms, they always want to say, well, you're paying by consumption. You're not. You go out there and you're paying by allocation, meaning the number of resources that you have assigned, whether or not you're using them. So if I can decrease the amount of resources that this thing is consuming, I may be able to turn around and drop the amount of resources that I'm allocating to this object. And if I can really cut the cost of a VM from, say, 8 CPUs to 4, you just cut the operational costs for those compute resources in half. And this stuff is billed by the second. So if you can tell your boss, I just went through an index maintenance, a week of index tuning, and I can save you 10 grand a month. Can I go to the PASS Summit? Can I go to SQL Skills Immersion events? Can I go to these different conferences or get some training or a bonus? That's the kind of stuff where not only are you making the CIO happy, you're making the CFO happy. And as the futures of a DBA, to me, it's now becoming more aware of how the business is using the platform and making action on making that platform more available and more efficient. So I know it's kind of a long-winded answer there, but to me, these skills that most DBAs should already have, they're going to become more important. And although the rote automation and the manual checking, it's going to start to decrease.
All right. What are some of the gotchas when moving SQL to a public cloud like Azure or AWS? I hear they change for I/O and outbound data transfer.
They charge for just about everything. It doesn't matter the platform. Essentially the things that change when you buy equipment on Prim, you're buying it up front. I mean, $250,000, $500,000 investment every 3 or 4 years. It's not the cheapest thing to worry about. When you're in the cloud, you're paying by allocation of certain objects. You're paying by consumption for others. Consumption for one, for network traffic. So if you have a really, really chatty application that, you've got select star from these tables and it's 100 columns wide and you're only using 2, you're going to get charged for the network traffic for all of those other columns that you don't care about. Same thing goes with CPU. If you're running these really, really long, resource-hungry applications that eat, 10, 16, tons of CPU power, things like that, it's gonna crush your bill. So you got to get in front of all of that kind of stuff, and you got to do it as soon as you get there, if not before, because it's just like virtualization was 10 years ago. If you've got an inefficient application and you virtualize it, it's just like putting lipstick on a pig. It's still a pig. You still have to worry about how heavy this thing is. When you go move it out to the cloud, you're now forced to go spend too much. You're still forced to wait for this thing to do whatever it's doing. And you've basically just shifted the problem. Instead of an upfront cost, now it's a monthly pain in your side.
All right. What programming or scripting tools should you know?
Ooh, PowerShell, bottom line.
Yeah.
Like it or not, this is where you need to be. Everything that you can do in the cloud, you can script. And if I have to click through it more than once, I'm going to script it out. PowerShell is the bottom line. Outside of that, it depends on what platform you want to use. If you're exploring SQL Server out there, then DBA tools can help you with a lot of this stuff. Wrote PowerShell to do sort of automation for virtual machine or object management. All these things are really important. There's so many other ones. It depends on what you want to use. We're doing a lot with C# right now because we're doing a lot of exploration in Cosmos DB for a few things that we're doing. And they don't have a T-SQL language. And essentially, if you want to get into it, you're using .NET, like it or not. So it all depends on how you want to use this. If it's just an open framework with SQL Server, PowerShell, T-SQL. If you want to extend it, they've now got Python in there. There's R in there if you want to do any statistics or analytics with it. Those are the big ones. Do you have anything to add on that one?
Yeah, I was going to add that, you mentioned it, but definitely if you're PowerShell with, look at DBA tools to kind of get your feet wet there. Yeah, it seems like they're trying to make us real programmers instead of database people, so.
Well, the challenge with some of these cloud-based data platforms is that a lot of the application logic that used to be in the database code, be it stored procs or whatever, it's shifting more into the application layer. Link is a prime example of this. And in order to go do some of the advanced business logic that we've normally been doing with queries and procs, you do need to be familiar with whatever your organization is using to go code and get to the data. It will make you a stronger DBA, because if you've ever been irritated with the code that an ORM generator produces and throws at your database, this is your chance to go clean that stuff up.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, my organization uses Entity Framework, so I'm in that every day. I was kind of surprised yesterday that I needed to get some data and I wasn't sure where it was, so I threw it back at the developer and said, "Hey, can you tell me where this data is?" And he sends me the query, and in the where clause was JSON pulling the data out because they have it stored in a JSON format. I was like, "Oh, really? I've got JSON in the database." I said, "You better be glad that production's on 2016 is all I got to tell you." So, yeah, I was surprised. I was like, "Oh, it was 2012, about 5 months ago." So yeah, so made his
Timing on
job.
that work.
Yeah, it's like made his job a lot easier to get the data back out, because I know that functionality's been in there a lot longer than 5 months. What he was pulling, the data is pulling out. He'd have been pulling his hair otherwise. All right. What level of cloud uptake are you seeing with the regulated industries like defense, finance, etc.? So as you kind of look at the customers you're working with, uh, who's kind of going faster toward the cloud and who's kind of really dragging their feet through the street?
Oh, that's a good question. I can answer this the same way I answered who are early adopters of virtualization 10 years ago. Because everything in this industry is cyclic. We know that. You study the past and you can predict the future. Cloud adoption right now, the stragglers, I see finance, I see healthcare, I see government entities. Now, there are government clouds out there. There are healthcare clouds out there designed to get around the bureaucracy of certifying a platform to be, HIPAA compliant or PCI compliant, things like that. So the act of moving there is nowhere near as bad as it used to, but a lot of times the companies have a pretty substantial infrastructure in-house, and a lot of times they may not want to get rid of that investment or to really throw it away. So I see them just starting to dabble in this, whereas early adopters, small private shops, startups who have only developed for the cloud. A lot of these different layers or these different companies, these are the ones that I see rushing out there. The ones that have historically straggled, though, we've seen them start to have an uptake in about the last 6 months on maybe not moving to it yet, but starting to take a really good look at it and explore how they want to use it. A lot of times we see a good first step as disaster recovery to the cloud. It's a whole lot cheaper than managing a DR site on your own, and it's there when you need it. So I see a lot of these stragglers now. They're looking at DR, they're making sure everything is secured, and they're kind of treading the waters lightly there, but they are starting to go.
Yeah, that's kind of where, like I mentioned earlier, we are bringing one database that's just growing like crazy back on premise. But as far as our DR, it's gone. It's up in Azure, so which is good. I don't have to deal with too much of it. So. With SQL on Azure, the pricing seems confusing and always changing. Can you explain when to use DTU pricing versus the newer vCore pricing?
Yeah, yeah. DTUs were, it was Microsoft's attempt at coming up with an abstracted away from the physical hardware itself unit of measurement. Andy Mallon actually has a really good blog post on the approximate hardware underneath different scales of DTU. He did a really good job with that post. So if you're out there, Andy, kudos to you for that one. The vCore model is brand new. And from what I've seen, this is, I think this was announced with Azure SQL Managed Instance, where you do get the number of cores out there. To me, as long as you know approximate what your demand is, it shouldn't be that big of a deal. To me, DTU, as long as you're watching it, as long as you know what you're consuming, you can adapt the model fairly easily. It's not the same cores, RAM, things like that, but it is just a unit of scale on consumption. If you find that you're bottlenecking, and Azure's got some really good measures out there to go show you the DTU consumption versus allocation, should be okay. The way my brain thinks, coming from an infrastructure background, is always vCore and VRAM. I'm really happy to see them introduce that with managed instances. The challenge there is, where is this going? We have a hybrid out there. I don't know. It just remains on what they're going to announce and see.
All right. The next question we have in queue is the GED application worldwide or just in Europe? And I think maybe, do you know what that is? Or maybe
GDPR. Is that GDPR?
No, he's
Yeah.
saying GED application. That's why I'm a little confused. He's not talking about GDPR.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that one.
Yeah, if you're talking about GDPR, then yes, it's going to be worldwide. It's like David was saying a while ago. You've got European expats living all over the world, and anywhere you've got someone that's of European descent that wants their data out of the database, then you're going to need to be able to do it. So.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, basically there are trade agreements with a whole bunch of different countries out there, and that's how this is enforceable, through those inherited laws.
Okay. Have you seen clients using a cloud database for server applications?
Yeah.
Any issues with this approach? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we do it. We've got some in-house apps that we've built. We're using Azure Sequel Database, and for what we need it for, it works great. We've got a number of others where if there are no dependencies on CLR, if there's no cross-database calls, if there's nothing fancy they're trying to do with external objects, if you just need a database, then there's really no reason why the application wouldn't work well with it. It's rock solid. It works. It's one of those. If the third-party app has got some honestly normal requirements for things that they shouldn't have done in the past, then database as a service may not be the best fit. That's more where, instance as a service or full bore VM may actually be better for you. But yeah, there are a lot of apps out there where just one database, that's all they need.
Yep, very, very true. So here's a big question for you. And not sure whether we're going to have time to answer this one, but I'm going to throw it out at you, and we'll see where we go from there. So he wants to know what's the difference between Azure Sequel DB and Cosmos DB.
Oh boy. Okay, I can answer this one in a nutshell. Azure SQL DB is you buying an empty SQL Server database, and you just get access to the database. Cosmos DB is entirely different. It's Microsoft's version of a global scale NoSQL database. And by NoSQL, there are SQL constructs in there where you do have tables and columns, but there's mechanisms in place where you're not just limited to that individual, table, columnar, mindset. So think something like Mongo database, MongoDB, but it's a Microsoft technology. They actually do have a Mongo compliant API for it, which works really, really well if you've got a Mongo application you want to move over. But it's very different in that with SQL Server, if you want to scale out, you've got to deal with availability groups and you've got to deal with all this other stuff. Whereas Cosmos DB, if you want to scale this thing out, largely for reads, then you basically just say scale out, select the location, hit go. And all of a sudden, you've now got this thing that automatically juggles where the request is coming from to provide the read portion of this from the geographic location close to you. I mean, it's a very different architecture. It is incredibly powerful for what it does. It doesn't have a lot of the logic that you normally get inside SQL Server with the T-SQL constructs, but for what it does, it's a document database. It is amazing. We're using this for a couple things we're working on. We see a couple of customers starting to explore it for customers of theirs that require distributed reporting, where they can actually get the data closer to their customers with one point of entry and it just replicates out. If they don't need real time, the consistency model you select, which is really cool. It's a phenomenal platform, just recently opened up by Microsoft, something they've been working on for a long time. And when it's the right tool, it's an incredible platform. And I would tell you to go start playing with it. You can, with that MSDN credit or Azure credit, you can get on there and deploy a small one and start playing around. It's pretty cool.
All right, sounds good. That's probably a pretty good synopsis of that. Do you know what the limitations are in Azure SQL Managed Instance preview? I heard SQL Agent is not fully functional.
I'm not going to comment on this one, largely because it's still in public preview, so whatever I say is subject to change. Yeah, it's one of those, I honestly am still waiting for them to approve me to get into it so I can start to play with it. So I've not been hands-on with it yet. So, what I read online is what you all can get as well. So, I don't want any misinformation out there.
Okay. Is there an equivalent of linked server in cloud databases?
If you're running Azure SQL Managed Instance or Azure VM, a linked server is a linked server. Or at least if Azure SQL Managed Instance supports it right now, I don't know. If you are a Azure SQL database, then unfortunately, no. The reason for that is rather than have their engine reach out to do data processing to another platform, they want your application to do this. So the application would then need to know how to reach out to these other areas to pull data in and out. That's one of the trade-offs with using a database as an instance. You just get the database.
Yeah, and even with Azure VM having linked server, I know my personal experience with Link Server is the performance has always been very poor. So if
Yeah.
I actually, so even if on Prim I'm talking between two different servers, I'll normally have the application do that. I'll say, go point to that server and that database versus this. I won't use Link Server. So, but
Yeah.
that's
I
my
mean, if you,
personal experience of it.
the big thing there is if you have the option to do it, then it'll work great. If the app is built where it's requiring link servers, then that would honestly be where you're kind of stuck to use the platforms that actually do support that item.
Okay. Here's one guy responding back on GDPR. He says, I actually attended two webcasts. He doesn't say which ones they are on GDPR because I know that Redgate's done a couple and some others.
Mm-hmm.
And he's saying that if they are EU citizens living outside the EU, they're not in scope. Only EU residents actually residing in the EU are. And I kind of read that yesterday, so there may be some, both of us, all of us may need to go back and do a little research and make sure we're under the law because we sure don't want to get caught. So,
No, I completely agree with that. I'd rather take the worst case scenario in there. My
yeah,
my big piece with that is uh, there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of misinformation out there.
right,
I'd rather err by the side of caution to be prepared. I mean, essentially, if you have to remove an entire history of a person from your databases, regardless or not of GDPR, there may be other reasons for it. What do you have to do it? What other regulations do you require that information being there, such as HIPAA?
right,
There's all of these trade-offs, and this is where sitting down with the security team in your organization and figuring out what are your specific systems and what is your business subject to. That's really where this whole thing is going to matter, to you. Because I mean, for me personally, if there is a problem, we delete a few emails, we delete, somebody's name out of a web subscription list, and we're covered. But a lot of other organizations, all the way down to objects and database backups, or things like a name and a machine name out of a web server log, or an audit trail coming inside a database of who's accessing what. You got to worry about all these things if you're subject to it.
Well, the interesting thing about that, David, is, we technically may not, whether we're subject to it or not, with what Facebook is going through right now. I'm sure that probably within the 6 to 9 months, we're probably going to have a similar law on our books coming. So if you're not there, you might as well just start getting there because
You
someone's
know,
going to have you do it. So,
bottom line is, security and privacy are in the forefront now, where I personally think they should have been there a long time ago. Um, and that includes people's important information. So with everything going on, I would rather you be prepared for what I figure the inevitable changes, where you need the ability to wipe the history of somebody, period. I get
right.
in front of it now.
I agree because it's going to be there everywhere, I think, especially with what's going on. All right. Someone's asking a question saying, is a Docker container going to replace virtual machines?
That's a really good question. And I would look at it this way. Um, you from an end user's perspective, yes. It maybe not replace it, but in a lot of cases it'll replace it. But where does the Docker container live? From a functional operational standpoint, it still has to have an operating system under it, which means either virtualization on-prem, virtualization in the cloud. You may not have to worry about it, but that layer will be there. So functionally speaking, you may not worry about it, but people in the system administration role, people that are building these back-end platforms for you to deploy containers on, they still have to worry about it.
All right. Does SQL Server running on Linux perform any better than Windows? Also, how's domain security handled?
So I'll address the domain security one first. SQL Server on Linux actually does support Windows Active Directory authentication. So as long as you set it up to use it, it'll work just the same as Windows. For the other piece there, and memory just slipped. What was the first part of the question?
Does running on Linux perform any better than running on Windows?
It's very subject to your workload. What I have found is that there are a handful of memory intensive operations that were a couple of percentage points better under certain workload types. In memory OLTP and column store, I noticed in the testing that I did with certain types of tests were pretty close, but just a little bit better on average. But it's subject to your workload. What I find is that the performance characteristics of SQL Server on Linux are so good that I mean, it sounds bad. I don't really look at the performance differences between them anymore because they are really, really equivalent. And largely speaking, if there are performance differences between them, it's more because of the differences in Windows and Linux than it is with the differences of the SQL Server engines, because it is the same engine. The differences there stem from a fundamental difference between Windows and Linux. Linux is really, really good about running tons of very small applications concurrently. Windows is really good at running big, single, monolithic applications. In my opinion, it's part of the reason why Microsoft joined the Linux Foundation, is so they could actually work with the kernel development teams to get better handling of this particular, these big applications in there. And that's just my personal opinion. I don't have anything to back it up with. But over the course of the development of the SQL Server Linux platform with all the public betas, the performance just got better and better and better. And now it's, in my opinion, it's functionally equivalent.
So let me ask you this. So if you were actually going to turn around and someone said you need to bring a SQL Server up, and the shop, let's say, had no Linux servers or very, very limited Linux servers, would you go with Windows or would you go with Linux?
I'd go with Windows, and here's why. The Windows side is, in that particular scenario, what your systems teams have the most experience managing. Because in the event that something goes wrong and it's all hands on deck and you have to go figure this thing out, do you want an underlying operating system that people are very green with? Not really. I want the platform that people know without having to go Bing or Google search for answers. I want something that is second nature. Does that mean they shouldn't explore it and get to the point where they're there? No, no way. But if we're deploying right now and the experience you have in-house is all Windows, I'd stick with Windows. Conversely, just like that other customer that we have, they are all Linux outside of their SQL Server farm. So their in-house experience is predominantly Linux, and they are chomping at the bit to go to it. And they have it in dev and test right now, and they're looking for midsummer launch.
Sweet.
Yeah.
So what have you heard of microservices and databases and how that's going to platform? Have you heard of that yet?
Yeah. It all depends on, so microservices really are use on demand transactions. So if you've got a mechanism that needs to perform some function, you can abstract it out of your application and put it into an application function server, basically. So Azure Functions, AWS Lambda, same kind of thing. They work extremely well. From a database perspective, you need to play it by ear, essentially. The whole standard DBA crutch, it depends. If it's faster for the application to reach out to do something with the stateless service, use it. If it's faster to keep the logic inside the application and build out that mechanism inside the app, do it. If it's inside the database, is it faster to have the database go out to an external entity to do something, or is it faster to keep it in the database? I don't know. I do know you are charged not only for every occurrence of the execution of the function, but you're charged for the resources it consumes. So if it's faster to do something in a function and cheaper in the long run, do it. But it all depends on the nature of your app and what you're trying to do with the function. You know, an example of this is we've got programs that will fetch perfmon WMI information and shoots them into a function on Azure, which essentially queues it up for insert into our Cosmos DB. By doing it that way, that's essentially my shock absorber whenever these things go and push tremendous amounts of info out there, and it basically just queues it up.
All right. Next question that we have is, which is cheaper, Docker setup or full VM configuration?
It depends, really.
Yeah, that's what I would say. I think that depends on what you have and how much, of each RAM and et cetera that you would have. So
yeah, RAM space, things like that. Because I mean, if you are running this on a platform that supports Docker natively and you're just dealing with a Docker image, it might be marginally cheaper because you're not paying the underlying operating system. But if it's Docker on Windows and it's already your footprint, you turned on the Docker engine inside a VM, you're already paying for the other piece anyway.
Okay. Okay, and this question comes up, said, this is off topic, but of course, with your knowledge and the way you've been going around customers and stuff, have you seen any SQL customers hit with performance problems after installing the Meltdown or Spectre patches? We've been holding off because of all the confusion.
So not only have I seen performance impacts, I'm not going to say problems, but I will say performance impacts. I have also seen challenges with customers deploying the patches just to have them rolled back, and then they have to go through additional emergency maintenance cycles to go deploy them and undo them. And if you're dealing with 1 or 2 servers, it's probably not that big of a deal, but we've got some that have thousands, and it is a real problem. The performance impact, I've seen anything from 1% to 20%. It seems like the more it hits storage, the worse it is. I don't have any customers that have had so big of a hit that they've had to change the way they operate or add more resources or make any functional changes other than the anecdotal, oh, well, that stinks, and that's about it.
Okay. Yeah, we haven't applied anything based upon what our infrastructure guys, manager has told us, so not yet anyway.
Yeah.
Containers on clouds, what does that mean? Someone asked.
Essentially, it means, let's take a web application bundle here. So we've got a .NET package. Maybe we have an external program that the application calls. What you can do is you can package up all of those pieces. So it may be multiple independent applications that all work together. You can package them up into one container. And it's essentially just a bundle of objects that run. They require an underlying operating system in order to do the execution of this. It's essentially kind of like dropping a VM on a platform that's ready for new VMs. This is basically, they abstract it away, but it's essentially an operating system that you drop a container on and then just turn on the application. So containers in the cloud basically means you prepare it in-house, such as, if you want to deploy a SQL server, there you go, it's ready to go. What if you want a SQL server plus an application server together as one bundle? Now you can do it. And then you can deploy it locally, deploy it on your desktop. If you want somebody as a developer to develop locally, you can deploy it out there. If you want to go turn this thing on somebody else's platform, and it'll just pick up and go drop over to the other platform, and it'll just turn on. It's essentially kind of like a virtual machine in that sense, except there's just not all the baggage of having to drag an operating system along with it. It makes life a whole lot easier.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, just so people are aware, since we've had a few topics on containers, we've actually had several presentations here over the past few months on containers, Windocs being one of them. Another guy, I forget his name, you might know him, David, out of Ireland, that uses it with SQL Server and stuff. But go check our YouTube channel because there are several container presentations that kind of help explain it. I know I'm still trying to get my arms around, around it and stuff, and what it means for me, and where we go from there. Of course, you got, as we all know now, we have several different operating systems that we can go on: Operations Manager, Visual Studio Code, Visual Studio, SSMS, you name it. Choose your tool, choose your poison, or what you want to connect with. So it's getting kind of crazy. I hope the fragmentation will come back in one day. So
it will. I mean, it's a growing technology. There's fragmentation all over the place. Between the container side of things and the automation side of things, it's fascinating to just sort of watch, who survives and who thrives and what eventually becomes the standard. Kubernetes has really become the standard for automation for a lot of these things, and it's, Docker became the standard in a lot of cases for containers, at least from the public perception side of things, and it's just fascinating to watch.
Yeah, it is fascinating to watch and try to keep up with it, So, I'm glad my retirement year is about 9 years away, where I can at least put my brain on cruise control. Maybe. So I'm sure there'll be something else to learn.
Always is.
Oh yeah. So next question is: I believe SQL Server data is stored in public cloud, is encrypted, but who controls the encryption key, and do I need to care?
Man, that is the good question right there. The underlying platform deals with the encryption key. Do you need to care? In my opinion, yes, you should always care. If you don't, you're not doing it right. But is it something to research? Always. Is it something to, without the research, act as a blocker for a migration? No way. These platforms are secure. They're so secure that the base platforms have achieved an incredible amount of compliance baked into it. They would not have earned that compliance unless these things were taken care of up front. And there's a lot of documentation out there around all of these things. Should you do your homework and investigate it and validate it? Of course. Should you care? To me, depends on how much you your current platform, as well as how much do you trust the certification that comes with whatever piece of the cloud that you decide to start using. I look at it that way. And if you are doing your layer of security properly, such as table level encryption through the application for very sensitive data, managing the stuff properly, encrypting backups, I would claim that it is as secure as you make it.
All right, David, we got one last question. We got about 2 minutes here. We'll go ahead and cover it right quick. Is there any difference when dealing with very large databases in the cloud versus on-prem?
Oh, of course. But there's a lot of difference with dealing with very large databases on-prem as well. Big databases in the cloud. So the funny thing is, I actually had an hour presentation prepared for today. We'll do that at a later point in time. I actually addressed part of this in there. The biggest thing is, if you're on-prem, you have bottlenecks to your infrastructure, such as how fast your storage can deliver speed, how big the VMs can go based on how many host resources that you have. You still have the same thing in the cloud. There are differences out there because there are some things, such as virtual disks, that by themselves, you can't grow them out in the cloud. Let's say I deploy a terabyte virtual disk that's got a cap of 5,000 IOPS. Let's say I need 1.1 terabytes to restore a database tomorrow. You're not restoring it on there. You're not growing that drive on there. You actually have to create a new drive, add it, and then migrate over your data. Now, there are ways around this with things like Storage Spaces Direct that you didn't really have to worry about on-prem, and now you kind of do. There's also caps with resource constraints based on the scale of the virtual object that you buy out in the cloud, such as certain Azure VMs, for example, may have an IOPS cap of 5,000 or 12,500 or 24,000. You can deploy 10 5,000 IOP virtual disks, but you're only going to cap at 12,500 IOPS total through all of them. These are things you didn't necessarily have to worry about as specifically on Prim. I mean, storage was as fast as it delivered it, and that was about it. So there are a lot of those pieces that you do have to worry about. And I think what we'll do is I'll make that one of the bigger focuses, in a future month here, whenever we do the slide and demo portion of what we're going to do today. I'm actually happy this turned into the Q&A session because I think these are a lot of fun.
Well, David, I know you and I both and other people need to get back to work, and I definitely always appreciate your time. The Q&A is fun because it then gives our listeners that people that are seeking answers that they may not have found, gives them opportunity to hear some other people talk about it. So, and I'll definitely get you on the calendar. You let me know. I got May, June, July, August. You name the month, and we'll get you on the calendar and actually do the presentation next time. So.
Yeah, shoot me an email with those, because I got to run here in just a second. I'm actually going to be presenting at the New England SQL Server User Group tonight. So if anybody's in the area, come on out. Good group. But do that, and let's definitely get on the calendar. I want to do more of the Q&A sessions because honestly, this is a blast. But then go through the slides as well.
Okay, well, it sounds good, David. Thanks again, and I'll be seeing you around some SQL Saturday someday. So
sounds good.
All right.
Cool.
Have a great day, everybody.
Easy. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, thanks, everybody, for attending. We'll talk to you all at the next one.
All right. Talk to you later. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.